Today, managing disks, there are a couple of videos that have links on how to do it, and I've got a video that I did that's linked there about RAID. You may or may not want to go through it. So I think it's 22 minutes. It goes through the different RAIDs and the advantages and disadvantages of them. There's a website out there that I use. I think it's called like raid.com or raid.net or raid.something that goes through the different features of RAID, and that's what a lot of this is here today. Windows 7 has some RAID, and RAID, nice term, it means redundant array of. Inexpensive now is what they say. They used to say redundant array of independent disks. What it means is we can have fault tolerance. In Windows 7, we can have two levels of RAID, 0 and 1. When we get to server, you can add RAID 5. You can also span disks, and what spanning does is takes disks and put them together in one volume. I'll try to do a really bad drawing about what we're kind of talking about there. What you do in a RAID is take disks, put them together for redundancy. Redundancy does not mean backup when we get to backup. Redundancy allows you to continue operating if you have a hardware failure. A backup allows you to continue operating if you come to work one day and the building's not there, in the extreme. Or if somebody set a fire in the knock or set a sprinkler off and destroyed the equipment. Backup is typically off-site, allows you to restore the information and continue operating. A RAID or redundancy allows you to continue to operate if you have a single disk failure, typically. Servers and some workstations now have RAID controllers built onto the motherboard. What we're going to talk about here is how to configure and to do and to manage your RAID in the Windows software. Same principle, same operation as you do these things. Understand common disk technology and related partition styles, and this is the one that Shiren, I know I jumped ahead to Ray, but Shiren got, I guess, an unpleasant lesson. Is that the saying it nicely? Because he had converted his disks in Windows to what Windows calls dynamic disks. Dynamic disks is a Windows thing. And when he put Linux on it, Linux was not happy, I believe. Is that safe to say?
It is very safe to say.
Very safe to say. Linux was not happy. Linux really was expecting to see a basic disk. Basic disk is a thing that he talked about in DOS, where we have partitions and all that other good stuff. We can have 4 partitions per disk, 4 Windows partitions per disk. Usually you do 3 primaries and an extended. The extended allows you to break it up into drive letters as you go on through. Dynamic disk creates volumes, and I think that now in the system they say create a volume instead of create a partition when you go to create stuff. But in the dynamic disk, you're going to be able to go all the way to 4 in a basic disk. I don't know which I said. In a basic disk, you can go to 4. In a dynamic disk, you can go basically to the number of letters are in the alphabet. Once you get to Z, you can't go back and use AA. That's the limitation. And if you recall in the BIOS, we have some reserve drives. A and B is reserved for flop. You can remap those, as you know. C and D are reserved for the hard drive. So the drive letters themselves are going to keep going. Basic and dynamic disk storage technology, one of the things that you will do in these labs is convert the disks to dynamic disks. That's going to then allow you to use the RAID technologies that are available in Windows 7. And that's basically, again, RAID 0 and RAID 1. RAID 1 is mirroring or duplexing depending on how many controllers you have. RAID 0 is a stripe, just a stripe. RAID 5 is a stripe that allows recovery. RAID 0 really doesn't have any redundancy in it. It's still considered a RAID volume, but there is no redundancy. That's one, if a disk fails, you put a new one in, rebuild the RAID, and restore it from backup. Typical disk management tools and tasks, the activities will get you through those. Understand partition and volume management. partition, we're still going to say partitions are on basic disks and volumes are on dynamic disks, although I think when you do those, we'll look at it, and I may make myself a liar, that when you create them, it's still going to say volume even if it's a basic disk.
Yes.
Understand VHD disk management, it does, doesn't it? So even though it is a partition, in a basic disk, you're creating a basic partition.
It's primary partition.
You can have
But
three.
it's labeled as a
Volume, yeah. It's labeled as a volume, but it is a primary partition. Again, you can have three primaries and an extended on a single disk drive, a single piece of hardware. VHD disk management, you can mount virtual hard drives, and you don't really get something for nothing in virtual hard drives. Because if you put it on a virtual hard drive, it's a file. It can be transferred from one location to another, but it still takes up physical disk space in order to do that. And remember, if you want to boot to a VHD or virtual hard drive, you can do that with the enterprise version of Windows 7. There are procedures, if you ever want to do that, there are procedures, lots of them on the internet that allow that. This technology categorizes how it's connected to the computer and how it's presented to Windows 7. How it's connected to the computer, is it a SCSI, is it an IDE? How are we connecting it to it? And how is it presented to Windows 7? What type of disk is it? And that's what there we're getting into. Are we got basic disks or do we have dynamic disks? All disks start out as basic disk because the dynamic disk requires the operating system in order to manage it. And I think that's the problem we have with Linux, is Linux doesn't know how to manage it, but it's a dynamic disk.
I don't know
they say again?
I don't know what it was. It's just text.
It just, yeah,
It
did not like it. If you read all of the stuff that they say, there are versions of Windows that they say it won't work here. And when you convert it, it's going to tell you something really clever like, when you do this, don't try to do anything else with it, any other operating system. Other operating systems may not be able to use it. The ones that understand the dynamic disk technology, you should be okay with if you want to dual boot them. But unless you want to use what I'm going to, from now on, probably call the clever things, like being able to create RAIDs, I don't know of any real good reason to convert to dynamic disk. And if you plan to dual boot with Linux, that's a real good reason not to convert to dynamic disk. I did that one time with a Windows 2000 machine, and then my C drive got full. You know, you want to extend the partition. Well, at that time, most of the software, all of it that I found at least, didn't understand how to handle dynamic disk. It's better than that now, but the way dynamic disk has to be handled is going to be different than the basic disks. So when we do those, and to consider the disk technology, internal, external, virtual hard drive, multiple disks as one logical disk. Multiple disks as one logical disk. That's where we're going to have to use the dynamic disk. What that means is that we could take multiple physical hard drives and group them together as a volume. You're going to get a bad drawing here early on for this, if I can get this thing to write. What we're doing in any of these RAID sort of volumes, if this pen will pen for me now, is if we have, guess I didn't get it marked. If we have multiple disks, and we would have read-write heads, what we do, we say as one logical disk, is we take these physical disks, disk 1 and disk 2, and wrap them up into a single volume, maybe an E drive, and you format the whole thing as a volume. So that even though they're different, discrete physical disks, when you go into Windows, the way it's presented to Windows, it's presented as a single volume. This we combine these two together. Depending on which RAIDs we use, you may or may not have redundancy. And in this case, you wouldn't have redundancy. All we've done is created a large disk, and that would be what spanning was about. Take multiple small disks. If we had several small disks and put them together as a single volume, and it's formatted as a volume so that you can take the multiples. This one we might be able to format this one as a RAID 0, for instance, because it has two disks. So multiple disks, one logical internal disk, SATA, IDE, SCSI. What we're really talking about is the way that the controller manages and what kind of connector we have. True? Data rate speeds vary with each of these, as you know, and that's the subject, one of the subjects of your other course, right? The computer management. Firmware. What's firmware? You've done that, right? Yep. What is firmware?
Software built into the hardware.
Software built into the hardware. What would we call that in a computer? Software built into the hardware. This is kind of like the BIOS, isn't it? Do each of those have a BIOS, input-output system, the management system, supported by the internal disk and storage, and boot from at least one of the installed internal disk drives? That's all defined in the disk itself. The BIOS tells it which disk to use to boot, because you can change your boot sequence, at least to some extent, right? You can go and tell it to boot to a USB, boot to a CD, boot to a disk or hard drive. Which hard drive is it going to boot to or attempt to boot to? One's probably the primary, the C drive, right? The primary master is the one we're going to do there. External disks, portables, you guys all do that. Everybody carries around a flash drive, or some people the portable hard drives. Most of the BIOSes now support booting to those devices if you want to do that. USB, eSATA, SCSI, or FireWire. When you see IEEE 1394, FireWire is what we're talking about there. And these standards change, don't they? USB 2, USB 3. USB 3 is really substantially faster than USB 2. And maybe that's why all of the USB 2 drives are so cheap now. They're trying to get rid of them so they get the USB 3 on them. I don't know. Best practice to avoid using external disks as a location for the operating system files, because whatever you do, whatever the speed, is probably going to be slower than an internal drive. Remember, the computer is taking information from the operating system on a regular basis, because not everything's going to fit in memory. Not everything will fit in memory regardless of what you have. Have you ever noticed that regardless of how much memory you have, Windows wants more?
Yep.
Always. We had 94 gig server. When we put server on the server operating system on, you know how big the page file was? 94 gig. Made the page file same size as the memory. Do we need a 94 gig page file? Probably not. Not with that amount of memory. But those are those things. Virtual hard disk, first version to natively support VHDs, and you can create VHDs within the operating system. You can mount VHDs within the operating system, which is something that's kind of new. Advantage is it's a file. You can store stuff on it. If you want to move it from one location to the other, all you have to do is copy it. Advantage for us is we make a single machine, and all of your computers start out as the same machine. That's why a lot of times when we give you a pre-made machine, what's the first error message you get? Duplicate name exists on the network. You know why? Because it's true. They all have the same name. Or you can copy them from one location to the other if you want the sameness for all of these things. Ultimate and enterprise support to natively boot from a virtual hard drive. Advantage there is You can, again, create a standard, a lot of times they call it a gold standard hard drive, and you can then make copies of it, copy from one to the other, and be able to have transportability of these things. That does work. We did it one time just to see if we could, and you can. After that, I honestly didn't see a whole lot of advantage to it, but that's just me. If you're going to dual boot, you can dual boot these things. And I said, if you want to see what one looks like when a dual boot starts up, just turn this machine off up here on the corner and turn it back on. It dual boots to Windows 8 and Windows 7. And you can see what happens there. Multiple disks and one logical disk. Logical disk appears to Windows 7 as if it's one disk drive. This is, again, when we group physical hard drives, my bad drawing, and they'll have better ones, multiple physical disks into one logical, one drive letter is what we're really talking about, so that they're all addressed that way. The issue with those become that if you have a problem with them, like the span drive, if you have a problem with the span, it destroys all the data. Even if you haven't even filled up the first drive. We had 3 drives and hadn't filled up the first drive, and the span got broken, all your data's gone away. We used to have to use those. Years ago, we used to use span drives in our NetWare server because disks weren't big enough. Physical disks weren't big enough to really handle it. If you use span drives, be sure you got a backup, because we had the spans go away a couple of times for, one of those no apparent reasons, little power fluctuations, lots of things can cause oddities to happen in any operating system. Windows seems to be kind of particularly power sensitive. Multiple disk is one logical disk using software built into the operating system. Or if you're using a server, honestly, you're probably going to use the hardware that allows that to happen. And all of this, we'll call it some form of RAID. Hardware RAIDs tend to be, it's not always 100%, but tend to be faster than software RAIDs. In most cases, a hardware, anything is going to be faster than a software. When you were doing, those of you who have done the Cisco, when you do a layer 3 switch, tends to be faster than a router. A layer 3 switch routes or forwards by IP address and hardware. So the hardwares tend to be faster than the software systems. Multiple disks connected in advanced hardware based on a RAID, redundant array of inexpensive now independent disks. Inexpensive because we can take a whole bunch of IDE drives, for instance, which are pretty cheap now, are they not? Actually, they're probably getting more expensive.
With IDEs?
Or IDEs or whatever you have, and combine them into a single drive letter. Advantages are you can have multiple reads and writes, simultaneous reads and writes. So for all you gamers, if you do a RAID 0, which is a stripe, if you got 3 disks, you can do simultaneous reads and writes. So it's going to speed up the access. Problem is, no redundancy. When you get a RAID 5, you do the similar thing, but you have a stripe on it that allows you to rebuild it if you lose one disk. Using several partition styles, a blank disk is first configured for use by Windows. One of these styles must be selected, MBR or GPT. GPT, the good partition table, is designed for disks that are greater than, partitions that are greater than 2 terabytes. And they'd say you got to select it. If you try to make something that's 2 terabytes or above, you don't select it, it'll fix it for you. Because NTFS 2 terabytes is the limit for that. Master boot record, been there, done that, right? You talked about that in DOS. Is that a true statement? Master boot record, what does that do? It just tells it where to go to start the operating system. Tells it where the boot partition is, basically. The boot partition tells it where to go on the drive to start the operating system. Standard for accessing hard disks is what we've used forever. It's what DOS used. It's what Windows has used up until we allowed these much larger disks to be managed by Windows, until we got the ability to put much larger disks in. The BIOS initializes the computer and must find and load the operating system. No real magic there. Includes the boot sector and the data table, how the sections or partitions of the space are used to store the files. Basically, it tells it where to go to start the operating system. And it tells it to do that. Where's all this information reside? Track 00. Is that true? Does that sound right?
Partition.
Your boot partition, which is where physically on the disk? 00. That's why the systems have to know, and you guys missed out on all the fun on that. You used to have to tell it what the architecture of the drive was. You don't have to do that anymore. They got a lot smarter. It tells the BIOS what the architecture is, so it automatically knows where to go to find 00, which then tells it where to go to start the operating system.
How many clusters, sectors?
How many sectors? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forever ago.
That was forever ago. As you get older, forever becomes a lot
Broader.
shorter. Yeah, it's a different thought process there. MBR disk technology is limited to organizing partitions up to 2 terabytes. After we get past that, and we got to go to the GPT partition. And again, in Windows, if you go bigger than that, it'll say, "Okay, let me do this for you." It doesn't say anything. It just automatically makes it a GPT partition, a GUID partition. Hard disk. You guys have already talked about that. Bulk storage, you know about hard drives, right? The different types of hard drives, the different connections, the different speeds. You do all of that in the computer management or computer configuration and the MBR. BIOS, you've talked about. Find and load the operating system. How many times have they said that? The GPT table, as the capacity grew, the file systems can't necessarily manage that size. It goes way back when, at one time, the biggest hard drive you could have was like, 250 meg or 500 meg or something like that. And then they came out with a gigabyte hard drive. Well, you had to figure out some way to do that. And one of the reasons that Windows has the extended partition, it allows you to use those in smaller drive letters, or Windows, the DOS, the operating systems themselves. Replace it for MBR. Identify with a unique code called a globally unique identifier. So you're going to see that term, globally unique identifier, that's going to come back in the Active Directory also. What that means is it's a number that allows it to find the stuff. With EFI, UEFI firmware running 64-bit additions can boot to the disk drive using the GPT partition table. So there are some requirements other than, oh yeah, I've got this really big disk drive, now what do I do with it in order to do that? Basic and dynamic storage, 2 different methods. Again, everything starts out as a basic disk. When you install the operating system, you install it in a basic partition on a basic disk. When you convert, if you convert that disk to a dynamic disk, that one really still remains a basic partition and is managed by the operating system that way. Because if we have to have the operating system to manage dynamic disks, how are you ever going to get started? So it really has to have some basic stuff there. Hard disk is initialized basic storage technology. Again, it's the partition. It's the partitioning information that we've used forever, back to DOS. Means to logically, simple means to logically organize the disk space, the basic disk partition. And they all work basically the same way. They have to have a table with the location, the random access table, and then we have the defrags and all the other stuff to put it back together. Basic disk can have its space organized into 1 or more defined areas called partitions, and the limit on partitions on a single drive is 4. You have 3 primaries and an extended when we go into these things. Store the partition table in the partition table of the master boot record. So where are they? How many of them do we have? Same thing that you've been doing. Primary stores the files used to load an operating system. So a primary partition can hold an operating system. And then we have an active partition. The active partition is the operating system that's going to boot when we do these things. Can have one active primary partition because you can only start one at a time. If you do a dual boot, you get a list, and what you really do when you get that list is specify which partition you want to be active, and it starts that operating system. Extended partition takes the place of primary partitions that are created. No drive letter on that folder. Once you create an extended partition, you're going to have free space in it, and you then in the free space you can create, manage space. What you're doing is, I think they say, you create drive letters. You specify how much space you want in those drive letters. So that allows you to use a lot of space in a partitioned disk. Even back to DOS, when you couldn't use the really big hard drive, you could have actually in DOS you could have a single primary partition and then an extended partition, and the extended partition then lets you section it off into different drive letters based on the amount at that time, usually the maximum size that you were allowed to use with it. Logical partition can only be created using the free space inside the extended partition. So we break that thing out. And when you want to get rid of these things, these logical partitions, you've got to get rid of everything inside it before you can make the partition go away. Drive letters can be assigned to it. Dynamic storage, hard disk using dynamic storage. And again, this is a Windows thing. Flexibility to logically organize disk space across one or more disk drives. That goes back to what we talked about before. It's going to be, what that says is it allows you to use RAIDs, doesn't it? Really? If we're going to combine these disks, you can't do that in a partition drive. You can do that with hardware, with a partition, with a basic drive. But if we want to create RAIDs, we need to do that. First introduced in Windows 2000, and when I was doing the Windows 2000, yes, it was. And when we did the conversion in a class this size, you would have at least one failure. Haven't had that happen, honestly, since XP, and haven't had it happen. The conversion fail with Windows 7. And you know what happens when the conversion fails? Everything goes away. So I have not had that happen with Windows 7, but that is one of the things that can happen. And I think that all the procedures when you do anything with a disk, step one is always make a backup. On the machines that we're using, we're not worried about it because if it fails, I'll make you a new one and we can move on from there. Blocks of space are called volumes versus partitions. In a practical sense, what's the real difference? Do you really care if it's called a volume or a partition? When we go to a dynamic disk, you can create RAIDs. And you can make Linux really angry if you try to dual boot it.
You're kidding.
True? Sitting right here, so they worked on that for hours one afternoon. Him and Chris. So.
And finally, what it ended up doing is it turned my C drive to an X drive, and then when it went to mount the thing, it just didn't go that high up the table.
Yeah.
And I had to wipe the whole thing, take it all the way down.
Yeah. And by the way, the only way to get back from a dynamic disk, because to go from a basic disk to a dynamic disk, you click on it and say convert it. Okay, I'm done. There's no unconvert. The way you get back is to wipe it out, create the partition, start over. So think about, do you really want it to be dynamic, honestly, before you convert to dynamic. I did it in Windows 2000 because, oh yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. Because they'll always tell you that, right? With the new technology, this is more efficient, this is better for you. Try them out. I don't know that you'll really find a lot of difference in what we do on a day-to-day basis. If you don't have hardware RAID controllers, it obviously is a way to create redundancy in a machine. The real redundancy RAID 5, you have to have a server operating system to make it work.
Yeah, this thing was less than pleased.
Less than pleased is his words. Simple volume, just a single dynamic disk is not fault tolerant. So we can, in a single disk, we can make the whole disk a volume, or we can make part of the disk a volume. You can have more than one, just like you created multiple partitions. On a basic disk, you can create multiple volumes on a single disk if it's large, if you want to isolate things. Difference is you can have a lot more of them when you do that. There's no fault tolerance on a simple volume, obviously. A span volume, 2 or more dynamic disks links the blocks of space, and that was the one that if we link these things, again, if we have, you like my disks? If this is disk 1 and this is disk 2, the spanning links these two together so that they appear as a single volume. You format the entire array as a single drive letter, E, D, F, whatever. When you start writing these things, it starts at the front and it writes front to back on the drive. If the span breaks at any time and it can't find the end of disk, just like if the system can't find the end of file, it's an invalid file. If you can't find the end of the disk, then everything is gone and you restore it from backup, because we all have backups, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Me too. I do have my data backed up. I want you to know that. And that's all you really need to back up, isn't it? Is your data. You can't use software RAID volumes for the operating system. It has to be on a single disk. Now, if you have hardware RAID, you can put the operating system on a hardware RAID, but you can't put it on a software RAID because you need the software to manage the RAID. It's one of those, catch-22 things is you can make a RAID, but you can't put the operating system on that RAID. When we do those things, if we have multiple disks and they're different sizes, you can only make the RAID as big as the smallest disk area that you're using. So if I've got let's say I got a 20 gig and a 100 gig, the 20 gig, the two combined as 20 gigs is the biggest it can be. They have to be matching sizes when you create a RAID as we go through those things. Stripe volume, 2 dynamic disks, 2 to 32. 32 is a maximum. When we and this is my magic pen that does stuff for me at times. Stripe volume, RAID 0. A striped volume allows you to have simultaneous reads and writes to the number of physical drives that you have. If you have 2, you can read and write to 2 drives at the same time. That's pretty good. Speeds things up. Obviously does speed things up. And it goes to a single volume. The problem with a RAID 0 solution is that if any of the disks, any single disk in there fails, the entire RAID fails. And the only way to get the data back is restore from backup. So we can use the RAID 0 if you want to speed it up. You've got multiple physical hard drives. Now, if you've got a single hard drive, it doesn't do any good, does it? Actually, what we're doing is putting together physical hard drives in this arrangement. A mirrored dynamic volume can be creating 2 dynamic disks, and what we're doing there, and you're getting all the bad drawings again. What we're doing there is taking 2 disks, and one's going to be a mirror image, a copy of the other one. In this one, you have to do 2 reads and 2 writes. Now, there's 2 ways that these things are configured. One of them is mirrored, and the other, whether we duplex it or not. A duplex disk, if we have separate controllers, then we have separate communications channels. If we have a single controller, you get the same disk storage, but you don't get as much redundancy. Because if you have a single controller and that controller fails, you lose both disks. So what happens here is when we write some information to this disk, we write the same information to that disk. A little bit slower on the writes, but faster on the reads because it can read simultaneously from the 2 disks. This one's set up so that if a disk fails, you can continue to operate on the remaining disk. And they have this thing set up in Windows 7 and the servers that if you right-click on your operating system drive, you can tell it to create a mirror and then which disk, and it'll automatically create a mirror image of your operating system for you. This one allows you to keep operating if you have a single disk failure. RAID 0 doesn't. RAID 1 does. RAID 1 does have fault tolerance. So in the Windows 7, this is really the only one that has any fault tolerance in it. There are other types of RAID. RAID 5, dynamic, and RAID 5 I think you're going to find is not available on Windows 7. RAID 5 is available on the server operating systems. Now, RAID 5 allows us to take 3, and it requires 3. It has a stripe on it that allows an algorithm to write to it that if one disk fails, then you can recreate the data. You can put a new disk in, recreate the data, rebuild the RAID. Your indicator that a disk has failed is that the system really does slow down, because the parity stripe has to rebuild the data for that particular disk. So in this one, 3 to 32 in a RAID 5, we format that as a single drive letter. The system that is popular now and the one that the server that your machines are on is running on is called a RAID 1.0, because you can combine these RAIDs. If you really had an issue, then you might want to do a RAID 1, two RAID 5s mirrored. Would that give you a lot of redundancy? What we use is a RAID 1.0, which is a RAID 0, and then it's mirrored. So different combinations of these things depending upon what you actually have available to you. And again, most of the new, and probably go as far as to say, yeah, all of the new servers come with RAID controllers built in. I'll bet you would have trouble finding a server without one, but you might. Desktops, not necessarily so. Being unhappy with me. Let's take a break and then we'll do the disk management tools because it's getting to break time. The disk management tools are basically 2 of them. One of them's a GUI and one of them's a command line.
Well, I'm thinking about it.
Anyhow, 2 basic tools, the disk management, which is the GUI, and disk part, which is a command line tool. And everybody, I don't want to use the command line. Once you get used to it, I was the same way. It's really pretty useful. And when you're doing imaging using ImageX in Chapter 2, the one that really does go a little long, start you out with ImageX. You create a partition. When you want to then transfer it one at a time, not using the deployment server or the other tools, you need to use ImageX to create the partitions to put the image on. And if you use the Windows server that comes without any GUI, you got to use it there. It's all command line. Fewer resources required. Smaller attack profile, people trying to hack it. So, two different tools in order to manage the partitions. The disk management is the one we're going to use predominantly in this course. This part we'll use actually in the infrastructure course. The server course would generally use the disk management tool also. It's an MMC, and I guess we could go through this, but the easiest thing, and I hopefully have a machine over here that will work. If you want to watch this at your desk, if you will go to, and I'll give you a chance to get there, go to the virtual machines, and there should be one called Demo. Looking at a couple of tools, and I turned on administrative tools, obviously, that will maybe let me get in there. Computer management, you can do your own MMC, obviously, and get to the system. Or you can use the computer management, if it'll open for me. Who's playing with my machine? And then in the disk management, and the disk management sometimes takes a little while to load the configuration. This one has a number of disks on it. Some of them are created. There's a utilities folder here. It's got some stuff. Fat convert, so when you do your tests, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. Yes, this is basically the test, the machine that you'll have on your practical. But if I wanted to convert, create, whatever, if I wanted, let's go back first to the conversion. If I wanted to create it, I can right-click on the gray space out here, convert to dynamic disk. When I do that, it asks me which disks I want to convert. You can do them one at a time. You can do them all at the same time, depending on what you want to do with them. Before we do that, I want to leave them. This one's online. A lot of times they'll start out as offline. But these say new simple volume. Let's just try this and see if we've lied to you. And I'm going to make too small. I like to make, when I'm playing with these things, I'm not actually going to put anything on them, just make small partitions. So we can create these things and get a drive letter next, and what we want to find out, we can name them here. Let's just call it Vol 1. How many of these am I supposed to be able to make? When you do these things, and it looks like this is the default now, use the quick format. The difference between a quick format and a full format is a full format is going to check for problems with the physical, with the disk itself. The quick format creates the structure that it needs in order to get there, and it's quick. So we said we should be able to create 4 of these, right? This thing is formatting, and it's done. We have a healthy partition, a new simple volume, and we'll do 250 meg again. And when you type the numbers in, it's in megabytes. So if you want gigabytes, you got to put an appropriate number in there. Like 10,000 megabytes is 10 gigabytes. Does that sound right?
Yep.
But that is measured in megabytes. This one's going to be H, and this would be volume 2, right? And you notice it defaults to NTFS. New simple volume. We just keep going up in the drive letters, right? Now what should I be able to do? Should I be able to make one more, right?
Yeah.
What should it be? Notice this one came out a little different than the first three. Says that it's a healthy volume and it has free space. This is the extended partition. Once we have the free space, we can then go in here and partition it or create volumes inside of it. But then what we have there basically are drive letters as we go through these things. If I convert any of these things, and here we have span, let's look at these things, span, striped, and mirrored volume. So notice that the RAID volume, RAID 5 volume is grayed out. It's not available in Windows 7. So we could create a span or a striped or a mirror. If I wanted to do something really clever like add a mirror, I can add a mirror to disk 3 or disk 4 of this thing. So you can't, I'm not going to go through it because it's got a copy of all the files. You can create a mirror image of your operating system files there, and you just specify where you want it to go to, and it will do that for you. You can shrink the volume. So those of you who didn't read the instructions and use the whole volume because you're supposed to make it, what, a 30 gig or something like that, right? And now you need space on there, empty space on here. We can go in and shrink the volume. Querying is going to look at it and it's going to ask what we want to shrink it to, but you can shrink the volume if you need to create that space in order to make the other labs work out right according to the book. It's not going to come. The reason is that's the way the book sets them up. And what I find out a lot of times when you're doing it the first time, you want the drive letters the same as the book wants, same as the book is. And if you do that, it's still querying. But when you get done, it'll ask you how much you want to shrink it by, how much you want to have left. So you can shrink those volumes. I'm probably going to have to sit here and wait till it gets done anyway because it's not going to let me go anywhere else, is it? That's basically it for the disk management tool. It allows you to create the volumes, change the size of the volumes, change the disk from dynamic or from basic to dynamic. But if we go to dynamic, there is no, I want to go back to basic. The way you do that is by creating a new basic partition and starting over, restoring from backup is the proper term for those. Okay, so instead of killing it, it says the amount of space to shrink in megabytes. So you can tell it how much. If I wanted 10 gig of empty space, I could say 10,000 megabytes, and it would do that. I'm not going to, because it does take a little bit of time, not a lot, but it takes a little bit of time depending on how much space you want. Takes some time to do the shrinking. The disk part command, this is all the ones that I just created, is asking me what I want to do with them. The disk part command I've already started here. If you need help with it, like most things Windows, just type help. It has some kind of different syntax that goes along with it, but if I wanted to list the drives or list disks, so it doesn't have drives in it, so, oh, you made a mistake. Here's what you can use with the list command. So I can list disk, and it tells me that I have disk 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. What the sizes are: disk 0, 48 gig, disk 1, 39 gig, 38 gig free, and on down the line. If I wanted to list, the other one was list partition, right? So there's no disk selected, which means that I've got to select a disk. You have to tell it which disk, and you have to have that disk is active before you can list the partitions. So it's there, it's available. You can create partitions with it. You can do everything you can with the GUI. You just have to use the syntax. When you do that, be careful. It tells me that disk 1 is now selected. List partition, 1,000 megabytes. Gives you the information. What disk? I used what, disk 3? And this one tells me which partitions, lists the partitions that are there. So I've created partitions. I really hadn't formatted those partitions yet. You can, again, do everything. Actually, we did format them because it was a quick format. You can do everything with it that you can do with the GUI and the core version of Windows Server. You have to use that because that's all that's available to you. The only thing in the core version of Windows 7, the core version of Server 2008 and Server 2012, what you get is a command prompt. Once you get the services installed, you can manage them with the tools from a workstation. For instance, DNS, once you get DNS installed, you don't have to manage it at the command prompt. You can use the DNS management tool from your Windows 7 workstation or from another server. But it's the one that's built as a version that does require fewer resources, has a much smaller attack surface for hackers, and it's is it popular or not? I don't really know, if you want to know the truth. It's kind of hard to get those details out of who's using it, who's not using it. So that's a overview quickie of these things. This management MMC, if you just wanted one instead of using the computer management, making your own MMC at the run line, the run search line is what they call it now, the combo line. Type MMC and add the snap-ins that you want. That's one of the things that over the course of time you may want to do is which tools you're going to use, make one, put it on your desktop. It's available to you when you open it. You've got the tools that you use. You don't have to keep going back into administrative tools in order to do that. We looked at that, how to configure those things. The disk parts, the command line tool, allows disk and volume operations to be performed at the command line. Anything that's done at the command line means it also can be scripted. That's one of the advantages of the command line tools. You can put them in a script. And that's something that, oh yeah, I'm not going to do that. And that's what I said too, until somebody says, hey, I need you to create 500 users over the weekend. How long is it going to take you to create 500 users using the GUI? Probably longer than the weekend unless you're a really good typist. If you can get the data, and when they create users here, we use a script. It's actually an automated script now, but we use a script in order to create the user, put you in groups, and then put you in the proper organizational unit. So that you can make 3 users or 100 users in about, I don't know, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. What you do have to have is the data files, and they can get those out of campus because those things are already created there. When you do this, the one thing that I didn't tell you, and you may or may not have seen, is go ahead and run this as an administrator. When you want to run the command prompt as administrator, just right-click on it, run as administrator, because there are some things, obviously, that regular users can't do. And that's, in Windows terms, called secondary logon. That's a service. If you look in the list of services, there will be one called secondary logon, which allows you to have 2 users logged on simultaneously in the same session. So the major activities, preparing hard disk cleanup is there. Has anybody ever found disk cleanup to be, the Windows disk cleanup to be all that useful? This is just a question.
It depends on the person's computer.
Depends on the computer. You can use that. Sometimes it'll take the temp files out. To me, disk cleanup is the one that John likes, I think, is C cleaner. Does a I think a lot better job of getting even the temp files out, because Windows will build temp files and build temp files and build temp files. Yeah, they say they make them go away, but not necessarily. Take a look at that sometime. But C cleaner is for personal use is free. You can download it, use it for free. I think, and if you use it commercially, they want you to. And there is a pay version of it. There's a pay version and a free version. Checking disk health and disk health. When I created those, it said that it was a healthy whatever volume. This is going to tell you if you have issues. There's a little activity in the resources. I think it says importing a disk. Just go through that. It's really simplistic, but it's really something that they might ask you if you take any of these tests, might ask you about. It's just a matter of saying, yeah, I want to import it. What happens, the reason that you might have to import a disk, if you have a dynamic disk that's created on one machine and you put it on another machine, it's not going to run until you import it. It's going to be called a foreign disk, and you have to import the foreign disk. And it's just a matter of clicking and saying, okay, import disk. It's nothing like having an encrypted disk and then having to be able to have the passwords and so on with those. Moving disks, converting disk types, and managing fault tolerance, all those things are there. And the managing fault tolerance is if we wanted to create a RAID and the RAIDs that we could convert there. And again, in Windows 7, how much fault tolerance do you have? You can create a mirror, and that's it for fault tolerance. The RAID 0 does not create any tolerance. A RAID 5 does, but RAID 5 is not available in Windows 7. It is available in the server versions. Scan for hardware changes. If you put one in and it doesn't show up, that goes back to hardware, and that's the case in a lot of times for each of these. If it doesn't scan for hardware changes, then you do there. Initializing new disks. That one didn't do it because the disks had all been initialized on that machine. If you install a disk and you go to it, it'll show up in the disk management tools. It'll ask you to initialize the disk. If it asks you to initialize the disk, just say, okay. What that does is says the operating system can now see it and manage it. Disk cleanup, talked about a little bit. You probably have used that. Supposed to take the unnecessary things out of off of the disk that you don't need, the temp files and a number of other things that are available to get back disk space. Because Windows will not only take all the memory that's available, take all the disk that's available too on it. It just grows and grows and grows. And if you go look at things and say, oh, you don't take that out, don't take that out, don't take that out. And it will continue to grow for you. The disk health, if you have a damaged disk, if you have a RAID and you have a disk that's failed, it's going to tell you that you have a failed redundancy. One of the things, and if you have the opportunity, go create, when you create a mirror, and then go take the disk out, make the disk go away, go back, start it back up, because it should run, you should still have your data, right? And go look at the disk, and they'll tell you there's a missing drive or something like that. Do you have a failed redundancy? Damaged area, reported as bad sectors. A disk health by selecting the Check Now button on the Tools tab. You may have to do that. Most of the time it's going to tell you if it's got a problem. Check disk command. What does check disk do? We've gone from check disk to scan disk to check disk, right?
If there's any problems, we'll find it.
Any problems, we'll find it. Kind of. What it's really looking for is comparing the file allocation table or the NFT table to the space that's actually being taken to see if there are problems there. And sometimes, hopefully, it's going to fix things. And typically, check disk can't run on a mounted drive. So if you run it on the C drive, typically it's going to ask if you want to schedule it the next time you reboot. So it has to mount the drive, run it before it actually starts the operating system. Defragmenting disks, what does that do for us? I heard a lot of
puts things in order.
Puts things in order so that makes the disk more efficient is what we're really trying to do there, because these are random access, right? Which means they're random reads and random writes. So if we take a 10 meg file out and put a 50 meg file in, it'll use that 10 meg and then it'll put the other 40 someplace else, and it uses it in the order that's available. What that does is put them back in the order so that The disk can go sit at a particular location for the maximum amount of time, get the information before the read-write head moves again. Best effort utility. It, by default now, is configured to run when you install Windows 1 a.m. every Wednesday, so you get defrag. If your machine's on, you're going to get defrags. And that's in the scheduled tasks. You can change that schedule, obviously. Moving disks from one computer to the other, the partitions, the volumes, may require special consideration. This is if it's a dynamic disk, you're going to have to import the foreign disk before you can actually use the information that's available. And you may get different drive letters, obviously. Import the foreign disk. Converting disk types, you saw how difficult that is to go from basic to dynamic, going the other direction, not so simplistic. Because you have to wipe it out and start over. When you convert, all the primary and logical partitions it contains are converted to a simple volume, and the dynamic disk is converted to a basic disk. All the volumes contained on that disk are destroyed. You have to start over. There's no, oh, I didn't really want to do this, let me go back. Fault tolerance. Dynamic disks support two types of fault tolerant volumes, mirrored and RAID 5. Windows 7 only supports mirroring or disk duplexing. Duplexing is we have two controllers, mirror if we have a single controller, if you get into those things. But we can create mirrors here and RAID 5 if you have a hardware RAID or if you have a server arrangement. Partition and volume management, they're going to take you through those. It's just that creating management, shrinking them, whatever you want to do with them. If you shrink the volume, you can obviously create a new volume, new partition in that area. I know that's in your book if you want to do those things. So the administrative tasks, create partitions and volumes, deleting them, extending them, and shrinking them. The problem with extending a partition is that the empty space has to be adjacent to touching that partition. This machine up here that I'm using ran out of space on C drive. I'd really love to do that, but I have created it as a dual boot. So the partition that's adjacent to my C drive's got my Windows 8 partition on it. I can go in, and it's running out of space too, but now I've got a bigger drive. I can go in and shrink it, create empty space on it, but it's not adjacent to my partition that I want to add the space to. There are tools that will allow you to do that, but Windows, the native operating system, won't. Disk part utility, and again the disk part administrative privileges, the way you get that is when you start it. Even if you do a start run CMD and you get the you get it in the search area, right-click on it, and you can right-click on it there and run as administrator. But just right-click on it, run as administrator is the way you get administrative privileges with that. These are creation rules. These are in the book. Deleting partitions, administrative equivalent user account, right-click, delete partition, and then you can make everything go away. If you make everything go away, does that mean that it's irrecoverable? No, there are softwares that will allow you to get the information back even if the partitioning information is not available. Different ones cost different amounts. There are some that are relatively inexpensive that will recover that information for you. Extending partitions and all these things require, and that's what it's saying, require administrative authority. Free space must be available, contiguous to the partitions being expanded. You got to have those free space contiguous, adjacent, touching it. If it's not touching it, you're not going to be able to use it with the windows. Again, there are other tools that will allow you to do those things that you can move the stuff around a little bit better, the partitioning information around a little bit better than you can in this one. But for the general, just shrink and extend it, it works pretty well. Extending and shrinking, and they've got some activity. You've got some activities to do that. Shrinking partitions, free space has got to exist in the partition. Files are automatically moved within the partition as required, depending on how much is there and how much you want to shrink. It's going to dictate how much time it actually takes to do those things. Virtual disks, we can create, attach, detach, and advanced management. We can create virtual hard drives. We can manage virtual hard drives. Should be able to mount virtual hard drives in order to manage what's on them. You can do that in Windows. If you want an open source utility, not to create, but to manage, to mount them and look at what's going on, as well as to mount ISOs on your computer, there's a little piece of software called Gizmo that is free that you can mount virtual hard drives and mount ISOs. If you don't want to expand the ISO, you can just leave it there and mount it, and then use the information that's in it. Creating a single file attached to a hard disk, and that's what we're using on our virtual machines. All of these things are files. Everybody has a file set for all of the disks that you're using. To me, particularly operating system files, it just seems like the virtual disks grow faster than the physical disks. That may just be a perception on my part, but if you start managing these things and doing things with hard drives or virtual hard drives, be prepared for a lot of disk space that you're going to use. And that has happened a couple of times. I try to keep track of the disks that we use, because when you run out of disk space on that, you know what happens to your virtual hard drives? They just all go crazy. They really do. So that's something that really does have to be monitored. It can be attached or mounted to the available operating system of the user. Disk management snap-in or the disk part, and again, we require administrative authority to do those things. Only time it mounts when the computer starts is if it is configured to boot to the VHD, and again, that's only with the Enterprise and the Ultimate versions. Detach or dismount it to make them available to the operating system of the user. You mount them and unmount them, basically. Attach and detach. So are they useful during the pause? Are they useful? I guess they can be. The usability, I think, for the virtual hard drive is the portability of the virtual hard drive. One of the things that we have used for some time is our domain controllers have been virtual machines for, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years. When we get a new physical machine in there, all you got to do is copy it from one machine to the other and start it up. You don't get into hardware incompatibilities with the machines themselves. Now this, just the hard drives themselves, if you've got data. Of course, you could take a hard drive out and take it from one location to the other. You could mount a file and somebody could download it. I mean, I'm kind of stretching to why we would do that. I think a lot of why we do that, particularly the boot to the virtual hard drive, is just because we can. Because there's a lot of that in these things in there. Do we really need to do that? Is there any difference between booting to a virtual hard drive and booting to a physical hard drive, except that you could make a copy of it and move it someplace else? Don't think so, really. Snap-in is limited. Can compact it, expand it, and look at the VHD properties. Compacted just like you can compact a file, compress a file, hopefully shrink it. The advantage, and I think maybe I understand Ryan's question now, the dynamic disks, or the disks themselves, you can create these things as a fixed disk or as a dynamic disk. The fixed disk, when you create the fixed disk, it takes whatever the maximum size that disk requires. In a dynamic disk, it grows, and maybe that's what you were asking. The dynamic disk grows as you add information to it. So it doesn't initially take all of the drive space that you've allocated to it. The ones that you guys have are like 128 gig, I think, or something like that. When you see them, they don't really take that. They take like 4 or 5 or 20, 200K right now, because there's no information on them on the starting disks. As you put information on them, they do grow. So, disk management. What are the two major tools? Going to be the disk management, the GUI, and the disk part utility. RAIDs, we can create some basic RAID 0 and 1 in Windows 7, and you can do span disk. Just from our experiences, if you do span disk, be sure you got backups, because we've had those things fail for no real apparent reason as you go through those, as they had operated over the years. And again, that was a long time ago when we had small disks and we needed a big volume. If you have multiple small disks that you want to make into a single larger volume, you can use the span disk for that. So basic and dynamic disk. When do you use dynamic disk? When would you use dynamic disk? When would you use dynamic disk? You wouldn't? But if you needed to use RAIDs, you would, wouldn't you? Software RAID, if you didn't have a hardware RAID. So if you wanted to use one of those. And I bet you Sharon would use it again to try to do a boot with Linux, would you? No.
Probably
Basic.
situations I'm running into now, because I've got Windows 7 boot from a dynamic disk,
And
it's not seeing my wireless adapter.
that could be, yeah. So are there questions on this? Somebody else going to have, yes, you got lab time now. Questions? Going once, going twice. I'll quit.